no one can take away the knowledge that's in your head and the skills that you've learned and compounded so that you become almost indestructible for whatever obstacles come your way. So for me, I'm constantly trying to build those pillars and work my way up that pyramid to be just a more robust individual.
This is Brandon Turner, and you are listening to the Average Joe Finances Podcast.
Welcome to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. Are you trying to get out of debt, invest, or just not sure where to start? Then this is the place for you. We discuss different ways to get out of the rat race and build your wealth. Join us on this wild ride to financial freedom.
Hey, welcome back to the Average Joe Finances Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Cavagioni, and today's guest is Taylor Avakian. Taylor, I am super excited to talk to you. We had a good conversation off camera just about multifamily real estate and then what you do in multifamily real estate. And I'm excited to talk about that with you today. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Mike, thank you so much for having me on here. I'm excited to talk about some multifamily, some real estate, and get into it.
Yeah, Taylor, awesome. Hey, another thing that Taylor mentioned before we started recording is that they're getting some work done on his building over there and the AC's out. So if you start to see him sweat profusely, don't worry. It's not the nerves. It's just really hot in LA. Okay.
I am nervous though to talk to you, Mike. That's for sure, man.
Stop it. All right, Taylor. Hey, so first things first, let's kick this off the same way we start every podcast episode. And we want to know more about you. So if you could share a little bit about yourself, tell us your story. Tell us, who is Taylor Avakian?
Appreciate it. Yeah, for sure. Grew up Sacramento, California, Northern California, born and raised, played sports all my life, and basically ended up going to school at the University of Alabama. And there I studied finance and got a specialization in real estate. And my path to real estate was very much, I had some family friends growing up who were in the space. Some were developers of multifamily, some were brokers themselves. And so I got to see what that was like from their perspective. The ability for them to be at their kids' baseball games, which I was playing in. And some of them had really nice cars. Some of them had really nice watches. I liked the lifestyle. I liked what they had. And so for me, that was always something that I had some interest in and a path that I was open to moving down. And so ended up graduating, came back home. I was figuring it out for 6 months and then came down and interviewed at a bunch of shops down here in Southern California, which I'm based in Los Angeles, and interviewed, got a job, and have been doing multifamily investment sales since 2018, ever since.
Right on. So straight from college, right into being a multifamily real estate broker. So that's pretty awesome. So I have to ask you this because as a multifamily investor and as many other multifamily investors that I know, a lot of people stay away from California, except I did talk to an investor recently that invests solely in California, which was pretty awesome. But I'm curious, what does it look like? What does the multifamily market look like in California right now?
So from an overall California perspective, I think there's always been a desire to live here. I think that's the biggest draw for people. We're I think, fifth biggest economy in the entire world, something like that. Yeah. So there's a lot of industry. There's a lot of people here, 45 million plus people who live in California. So it's a very broad renter market. The housing market is extremely expensive in most of the major MSAs. And so I think the drive for a lot of investors as to why California they feel is a good place to invest is because of that renter demand and the rental growth that has occurred over the last 40 years in California. From the investors that I speak to, and I primarily work in Southern California and Los Angeles, the city of LA, which has more regulations and rent control laws and things that are a little more restrictive. But I think a lot of investors who have grown up in that and have invested in Los Angeles, they understand the barriers to entry, because if someone was from out of state and wanted to come and invest and add value, there's so many nuances to investing here that it becomes very difficult if you don't have the pieces in place to then be able to effectively execute your business strategy. So I think that's why a lot of people invest here. And then it's California, the growth's here, man.
Yeah. When you put it that way, it's very appealing. But speaking of a couple things that you mentioned there, with especially in the LA market, there's a lot of laws and regulations that that kind of could put a hamper on some people. So you talked about one thing like rent regulation, rent laws and things like that. So how does somebody like get around some of those challenges that you see in LA's market?
Good question. There's a lot of different things that you can do. And for the primary clients that I work with, most of them are value add investors. So because of that, historically, a lot of the strategy in investing in California has been tenant buyouts or buying properties that have low rents because of the rent control laws, renovating the units, increasing the rents and bringing new tenants in there, thus increasing the NOI and then the value. But with the rent control, sometimes you'll have tenants who've been in the units for 10, 20, 30, 40 years, right? And so in those situations, historically, what people have done is tenant buyout agreements, which is basically there's a certain amount of money that you can pay to have a tenant leave that unit, mutually executed, and then they leave, and then you go and renovate and juice the rents. So that's all priced into where their assumptions in terms of where the return on cost is and how they're going to get to that number that they're underwriting in that situation.
Okay, yeah. So that's one of the ways that you can do it is buy the tenants out. Now, what happens if you get to a situation where you have a tenant that absolutely refuses to leave, no matter how much you offer them? How do you handle a situation like that?
It's hard. It's very difficult. And a lot of times I've had clients who've bought buildings with the assumption that they'd be able to get a tenant out. And for whatever reason, the tenant was not willing to leave, and it does mess up the business plan. And there's some things that you can't do anything about it. If they're not willing to leave, they're not willing to take any money, then you can't do anything. So I think that's part of the risk associated with it. And there's some things that investors will do on the front end, which some are very risky. Some are depending on the seller, if they're willing to let the buyer negotiate before closing escrow, which can bite the seller in the ass, pardon my French. And so it's a nuance, right? It's the barriers to entry. It's knowing how much you can pay, what the renovation costs are going to be, if the tenant profile fits someone who would accept a buyout, what location it's in, how much under market the rents are. So it's like it's just art and a science all in one. But these guys and gals who've been syndicating and value add investing, and those who are long-term holders too, they know the strategy that fits them, and they tend to stick with that strategy and buy buildings that fit that strategy.
Yeah, especially if they're buying in LA, they have to know what the proper strategy is for that market. Otherwise, if you're going in there pretty green, it might not work out well for you if you don't know. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why it's important to know about your specific market that you're investing in. I feel like if people understood, or actually there are people that understand this, because there are people that invest in California and in LA. So for the folks that actually do understand what LA's laws are and what their regulations are, it's almost a gold mine for them, because you don't have to worry about too many out-of-state investors coming in because they want to stay away from California, because a lot of those laws and regulations scare them. But we all know when it comes to real estate investors, the ones that are the most creative and figure out ways around certain things are the ones that will go out and absolutely crush things. I'm sure that there's a whole market there for people to thrive, and they already are there and thriving. Now, what about looking at LA's market right now, right? Do you see like a big difference? Because you said you started this in 2018, right? Do you see a big difference from when you first started in 2018 to COVID and now to this quote unquote post-COVID era? What kind of shifts have you seen in the market there, especially with how strict California was, right, when it came to COVID regulations? So what are some of the big differences that you see from the time you started in 2018 to now in 2023?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're in October of 2023, and since March of 2020, in the city of Los Angeles, owners of rent control apartments built before 1978 have not been allowed to increase their rents. And it's October of 2023. That has been a big change and a big effect on the overall market itself. I think that restriction has been super tough for a lot of landlords, mom and pop, and institutional, because expenses, as we know, inflation, all this stuff, those keep going up. And if you can't combat that with increasing the rents, and if a tenant doesn't leave, then what are you going to be able to do? Your NOI keeps coming down. Your insurance costs have gone through the roof over the last 2 years because of a whole bunch of different factors in California. Insurance companies are pulling out. So it's just become, there's more hoops to jump through. There's more hurdles that you have to get through, I think, than previously. And it seems like with what's happening moving forward with the regulations, it's only going to get tougher. So for instance, like back in 2017, 2018, 2019, pre-COVID, like most tenants, talking about buyouts, I had a client who were buying these 1920s big brick buildings, and these buildings are 100 years old, and so most of them are mostly studios with a few one bedrooms in there, and depending on where the rents were, maybe there was 20 to 35% rental upside. So I had a client who once bought these 1920s buildings for, let's say, $150 a door, and to buy out some of these tenants, it was 5, 7, 8, 10 grand. Now in 2023, a lot of the tenants are aware of this. A lot of people, the government has been educating them, which I think is a good thing. But I had a client who offered someone like $75,000 to leave, and they were paying about $500 less than market, and they still would not accept that. And so going from $7,000 to $75,000 and not being able to make that happen, that is a huge wrench in a lot of these business plans and a lot of the value that's supposed to be unlocked when you're buying a value add building. And insurance for these 1920s buildings, I've had clients who previously was 55 cents a square foot, are $1.50, $2 a square foot, which basically wipes out any income that you have in the building. And these sort of hurdles that we've seen have shifted, at least in my experience over the last 5 years, pretty dramatically, to where you got to buy and you got to have a pretty solid business plan with capped downside for the investments to make sense, especially if you're raising money from investors, because mostly people have returns that they're trying to hit. And if you're syndicating, whatever that pref return is, and you got a cash on cash, and a lot of people were buying, renovating, and selling when the market was good. Now with where rates are today, like that's shifted a lot. I don't know if you've been following the 10-year treasury curve, but I had a few deals that are not going too well right now, because previously projected over the next 5 to 10 years that the 10-year was supposed to be coming down to in the threes. Now most analysts, and again, no one knows what's going to be happening, but analysts are predicting it to stay above 5, some up into 2035, which is just, I don't know how you could predict that far ahead, but it's pretty crazy to see what's happened in terms of the shifts of the market fundamentals and how investors are looking at California as a whole and who's willing to even invest here. Because like I said, there are people willing to. There's people who love California, are long California. I personally am long California, but there's many investors who've just decided we're not going to do it. It's too risky. The rewards are not worth the risk. So I think that's what I've seen shift in the last 5 years specifically.
Yeah, absolutely. That's okay. Just talking about the one part you were talking about where one of your clients offered 75,000 for somebody to get out.
Yeah.
And they didn't accept it. And they were only paying 500 less than market rent.
Yeah.
That's insane. So even that 75,000, that would have took a very long time to make that back up. So
the funny thing is,
that's crazy.
Yeah, the funny thing is, because of the way that the values of the buildings are, you can do the math on what the return would be. And there's a number that makes sense, right? So if you can calculate, okay, if the building's going to be worth a 5 cap at exit and they're paying $500 below, you can do the math to figure out how much am I willing to pay for it to make and hit my return on cost or whatever metric that you're trying to hit. I had a client in Santa Monica, which is even stricter, and they're their own city, paid $300,000 for a buyout of a tenant. And this was like a 3-bedroom. They're paying, I don't know, $600 or something like that. And it should be renting for $5,000 or $6,000. So those are the situations where if the delta is big enough, the math makes sense, even to pay someone $300,000.
That's insane. I need to go move into a place in California and just squat for a while.
Yeah.
You want to
have to pay rent.
Nice return on investment. Woo.
All right. No, that's rent for 3 years. So
stuff.
that was pretty nice for them too.
No, that's good though, that even with paying that amount, that they're able to not only recoup that, but also profit. It's all, again, it is all about how the numbers shake out.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the biggest thing that as a real estate investor, you really have to pay attention to. You can't just go into it with the napkin math and say, okay, here we go. Like, you need to have that full breakdown, because even going back to that example for $75,000, that's, you're looking at, if you were just to go off the rent alone, and 18 years to get that $75,000 back, right? So it's crazy. But then when you look at the fact that by increasing that rent by $500, depending on how many other units there are there and how much it increased the value of that building, that's what's going through the head of the investor. So for my listeners, I just want to make sure you guys understand, like, when you look into some of these numbers, you're like, oh my God, why is this person going to buy out for that much? That's why, right? Because the fact of increasing that one unit up another $500 a month has increased the value of that building so much more than that $75,000.
Yeah.
Okay. So we talked a little bit about what things look like pre-COVID and then like post-COVID era. Now I'm curious, what are you thinking, or what are you seeing right now over the next maybe like year or two for like opportunities that are going to be available for landlords in LA or investors?
Yeah, that's a great question. And if I knew the exact answer, I think I'd be a very wealthy man.
Hey man,
but
we got guys predicting all the way out to 2035. I'm just asking
it's
for
so
1 to 2
crazy.
years. No, I'm kidding.
I know. No, I know. That honestly blows my mind. I'm like, because a side note, when you go back and look at what people predict, very rarely is anyone accurate. If you go back and see what people said 2 years ago, they were completely off. So I don't think anyone knows what's going to happen.
I thought I saw a crystal ball in the background there, but it's just it's a die. So it's a 6-sided die. You could just roll the die, and that'll probably be a good sufficient answer.
Estimate of what's going to be happening. Yeah, for sure. In terms of opportunities in Los Angeles, I think right now I've seen prices come to a place where I didn't think they would be in terms of just the pricing of buildings, not necessarily on a yield perspective, but more on a basis. So price per unit, price per square foot, where like some of these prices are, 07, 08, 09, 10, 11 pricing that was, and that time the market was crazy, right? This is not, it doesn't feel like it's that. And I wasn't around at that time, but from the people who were and that I've spoken to, they say it doesn't feel like that yet. But the pricing is there. So I do a lot of Koreatown multifamily, which historically has some older 1920s buildings and things like that. At the peak, those were trading at 200, 220, 250 a door, depending on kind of the class of those constructions and the size. Now you can get those deals for 110, 115, 120, 130 a door. And that to me is just seems like an opportunity where, as long as the fundamentals continue to remain the same and certain laws do not get pushed through, because next year on the ballot, there's some interesting laws that really could dramatically affect the value of California real estate forever, and specifically Los Angeles. And so if those laws favor in the direction of the landlord, I think there's a lot of opportunity in some of these asset classes that maybe have gotten hit hard with rising expenses, like the 1920s buildings. And if I was buying today, I would go and buy on a basis perspective. So I'd go and buy a great building in a good location at a compressed basis compared to what it was trading for 12, 24 months ago. And I don't think we're going to get to those in the next foreseeable future, the 3% interest rate loans and things like that. But I do think there's still going to be a huge value add perspective. And I think it's inevitable that eventually prices will get to a point where that makes sense. Again, I don't know how long that's going to take. And so maybe the math doesn't work out for a lot of investors and their timeline and risk profiles. But if it was me, I would be buying at a basis perspective in a good location where that there's going to be tenant rent growth and opportunity for growth in the future.
Okay, right on. Speaking of that, how does somebody find those actual, I guess you can call them hidden gems, right? How does somebody find something that will meet that requirement, that will meet the potential income objectives that they want? Because like we've been talking about this entire time, that there's always risk no matter where you invest, right? But going off of a basis like that, how does somebody find something that has that potential, right, in a market like that?
relationships. Most of the deals that get done at those Goldilocks sweetheart good deal numbers are done off market. And so it's through relationships, mostly with brokers, honestly. If you're a well-known name and you've created relationships and you're in the comps, your brand name is in a lot of places, and not necessarily from a media perspective, but in the brokerage community, in the real estate community, people know who you are. You get those opportunities shown to you first because brokers are incentivized to close deals. And so if you are known as a deal closer, then you're going to get those deals first before anyone else. So I think it's, from an investor's perspective, building relationships with the people who are doing deals and staying in touch with them, building rapport, bonding, becoming friends with these people is hugely valuable to investors. And I think the ones who do it best are the ones who are just genuinely good people. They're straightforward. They tell you what it is. They're not playing games. They know what they want, and they share that with you as a broker. And I know what they're looking for. And so when that's clear to me, then when I see an opportunity and they're at the top of my mind, I know, oh, okay, I'm going to send it to these guys or this group. So for me, I think from an investor's perspective, becoming friends with the brokers is how you find those kind of deals.
Right on, Taylor. All right, Taylor. So obviously you were talking about building relationships, and for the investors right out there, the biggest thing is building relationships with those brokers to find those deals that have the best potential, right? Because you're not going to find them listed anywhere. I want to ask you, as a real estate broker, right? Since you've been doing this since 2018, you've been through this transition. Like you said, you weren't there for the big one in 2008, 2009 timeframe to see what that 2010 onward market looked like, but you heard the quote unquote horror stories, right? You're getting a piece of that right now. You're in a market that's transitioning. So what would you say for you, Taylor, is your superpower when it comes to being a real estate broker?
I would say for myself that what I've been able to do well is be very proactive with the outreach that I do in terms of prospecting and trying to find new opportunities. For me, like the company that I work with, I was very fortunate enough to have a great mentor, and the company culture here was one of proactivity. So like when I was first starting out in the business, for the first 2 years, I was making 500 to 600 cold calls a week, just consistently over and over and over again. And for me, that consistency has led into a lot of success that I've had in my career, because that prospecting was just such a paramount aspect to what I was doing on a day-to-day basis. And I'm a firm believer that prospecting in itself and outreach and things like that is a huge driver for lead generation for me and for deal flow and velocity. So I think as from a superpower perspective, I just have a capacity to work, I think, that maybe is a little bit harder to quantify and maintain. I think the ability for me to maintain that fuel tank is pretty big for me. And so I don't know if that's nature, nurture, whatever it is, but I've just had this capacity to continue to push through the tough times and through the slow periods. And for me, the phrase burn the ships, I feel like I burned the ships a long time ago. So I didn't give myself a second option in terms of what else was out there. And that superpower of just having that tank, that gas tank to continue to push, I think has been something that has allowed me to separate myself maybe from some other brokers who started at the same time.
Right on. Yeah. So being able to persevere and push through all of these challenges that we're all facing right now in this uncertain market and uncertain time, with it does remind me of post 2008, 2009, post the Great Recession, but not enough to the point where I think it's the same kind of market, right? So what we went through back then is a market that just took off, and we're not seeing that right now. What we're seeing now is a market coming to a screeching halt. So what we're seeing is almost what feels like a buildup to 2008, 2009, which is the opposite of what people were expecting to happen post-pandemic. And I look back and I look at what the pandemic kind of taught me is that, just looking back at it itself, I had a property back in Chesapeake, Virginia that I purchased a month before COVID made it to the US, right? And everybody was thinking, oh my goodness, what's going to happen? What's going to happen? I had a tenant that lost their job. They couldn't pay their rent. And that was a challenge I had to deal with, but I wound up finding a program for them, and they back paid the rent that he owed me and all the late fees and everything. It was great. Right. And a lot of people were looking at the pandemic as, oh my goodness, this is going to be just like 2008, 2009, and the market's going to crash because of this pandemic and this and that. And it did the absolute opposite, right? Rents were going up, property values started skyrocketing out of nowhere. I only owned that property for a year, and I sold it for a pretty nice profit that I took that profit and put it into multifamily, right? So it's pretty interesting how you can make these projections and predictions all you want, but when reality sets in, you're okay, here's what we were right about, here's what we were wrong about. So it is good to make educated guesses and make educated projections, but you have to be prepared for anything to happen. And that's why I think it's so important for investors to have all those tools in their tool belts. And one of those tools being having the right broker, right? Having the right person in your back pocket, having that relationship built. Because when all these other deals are out there that aren't going to meet their numbers, and then that broker that you have in your pocket finds that pocket listing, finds that one gem, that diamond in the rough, and they call you up because you built that relationship, you built that really good rapport with them. You're the one who gets that phone call, you're the one who gets the deal. There are still opportunities out there now, albeit it might not be as many as there were in 2021, but there's still plenty of deals to be had. And I bring this up because I feel like a lot of folks they just look at the interest rates and they automatically get turned off. I am a residential real estate agent right out here in Hawaii. And it's one of the things I see all the time too, is a lot of people that are just coming out to look, but they're not willing to commit because of the interest rates. And the thing is, a lot of people here are selling their homes with assumption. Like you can assume they're doing loan assumptions, right? So you can assume and get that 3.5% interest rate loan. You just have to put a significant down payment on to cover the rest of what the value of that property is. So there are different ways to get around it. And I know a lot of multifamily deals right now are selling with interest rate assumptions as well. And that's another opportunity. And then there's so many other things you could do, seller financing some of the debt. So there are different ways and different strategies to make it work. With that being said, Taylor, for the folks that are landlords in LA and they're looking at growing their growth and profitability for the future, and maybe they're not able to find those deals right now, they're going to be coming eventually, right? Because there's going to be a point where it gets a breaking point, and we're either going to see a crash or we're going to see it start to gradually start coming down, which is what we're seeing out here in the market in Hawaii. And each market is different, right? So what do you think landlords specifically in your market should be directing like their financial investments for that long-term growth and profitability?
We'll get back to the show after a brief break. What's going on, everybody? So today I want to talk to you about Wealth Tender. If you are a finance content creator, whether that's a blog, a podcast, you're a financial advisor or a financial coach, I highly recommend you check out Wealth Tender. Wealth Tender is building a database of all the top finance blogs, podcasts, and the financial advisors and financial coaches that they have on there are vetted and top-notch. So we actually had the pleasure of hosting Brian Thorpe, the CEO and founder of Wealth Tender, on Average Joe Finance's podcast, episode 25. Go check out that episode, listen to his story, and listen to him talk about the database that he's building. It's really phenomenal stuff. So if you're interested in checking out the directory, or if you're a finance content creator and you're interested in joining up with the directory, go to the link below in the show notes, or check out www.averagejoefinances.com/wealthtender.
Looking to level up your podcast, social media, or both? Introducing Edit Pods, the ultimate podcast editing and social media management service. We offer top-notch audio and video editing, eye-catching artwork, engaging audiograms, and tailored social media posts. From captivating infographics to short video clips for Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, and YouTube, we've got you covered. We'll manage your social media, posting weekly to keep your audience actively engaged. Elevate your podcast with Edit Pods. Visit editpods.com today.
Let's get back to today's episode.
I don't know in terms of what to do from a financial investment perspective, but I think this is just a universal truth that I think would be good for investors, brokers, anyone who's in the real estate business. Control the controllables. Control what you can actually effectively do. And so from an investor's perspective, whether that's going out and actively meeting brokers, picking up the phone, calling them, grabbing coffee, grabbing dinner, lunch, you can control that, right? You can control the outreach of that. You can't control who's going to say yes, but you can control the outreach of actually going and doing that. And you can control setting up yourself for when the time's right, whether that's starting to put money aside for when the investment comes. You can control putting, I'm going to invest $500 in this fund every month and it's going to go in there. And when I'm ready, I can use that to go and buy. You can actually be the one who's making that decision. So I think from that perspective, figuring out what of the decisions that helps you through that process and writing them down and saying, okay, can I control this? Can I effectively move this in the direction that I want to? Or can I prepare for something when the time's right? And whether that's the relationships through the bank, getting your finances in order, getting your proof of funds, your schedule of real estate, all the documentation that is typically used to streamline a deal, controlling that on the front end so that when the time is right, you can quickly and with speed act and move and go towards that opportunity that is in front of you at that time.
Absolutely. I love that answer. A very stoic answer, right? Because you're talking about the things that you can control, right? That's what you should focus on. Things you can't control, you just got to let that stuff go and focus on the things that you can control and change. So I absolutely love that answer. I've been like really listening to a lot of videos on stoicism and things like that. So it's like that kind of just pulled my attention right there as soon as you said that.
Marcus Aurelius, man.
Exactly. That's exactly who I was thinking of when you said that. Because he's the one that said that. Focus on the things that you can control and not the things that you can't control. And I think, isn't he the one that also came up with the serenity prayer that like all of the different organizations use for, I guess, what is it? AA and stuff, like Alcoholics Anonymous and stuff, like to accept the things you cannot change and the wisdom to know the difference. I think he's actually the one that came up with that, because it was an audio book. I'm trying to remember which one it was that I was listening to, where it talked about that, and it talked about Marcus Aurelius, and it was talking about the different letters that he wrote. And that was one of the things that was in there was that prayer. So I thought
I'm very much a lifelong learner. Human optimization. So I'm very big into trying to grow the business, obviously. And one way that I think is an opportunity for me is to grow the brand of what my business is, Taylor Avakian, the broker business. And so I met with a brand strategist and we were talking about what my and is, what else do I want to be known for? And so we were coming up with some things and she was like asking me, what do you do outside of the office? And I'm like, I don't know, read real estate books, listen to podcasts on how to be a better leader. Everything that I do, even on the weekends, is 7 days a week is geared towards real estate. And so she's, I think for you, your and is human optimization. And I was like, yeah, actually that is pretty good, because health and fitness is very important to me. What I eat, my lifestyle, everything to make me a better person, human, communication and communications, relationships, psychology, studying all that stuff to optimize myself as a person. And so that human optimization, which I learn a lot from Stoicism, I think you can take that into whatever aspect of your life that you're dealing with, struggling with, working through, and put it through that lens, that like second order level of thinking. And so for me, I'm constantly trying to improve that level of skills, because there's some skills that you can stack on top of each other, right? In terms of the order of which is important. I think health is at the bottom, because if you don't have health, you don't have anything else. But right above that is your skill level and your knowledge, because no matter what happens to you, no one can take that away from you. No one can take away the knowledge that's in your head and the skills that you've learned and compounded, so that you become almost indestructible for whatever obstacles come your way. So for me, I'm constantly trying to build those pillars and work my way up that pyramid to be just a more robust individual. Hard to kill, I think says you got to be hard to kill. So for me, I just try to be very hard to kill, to say bluntly.
Absolutely. Another great quote too from Extreme Ownership was something I recently just finished as well. Like I started and stopped it several times, and then I finally told myself, hey, I'm not really having extreme ownership of my ability to finish this book right now. So
Yeah.
it was over a 4-day period. I just knocked it out and just got it done. And man, what a great experience that was.
What is so strange, and I have a lot of these thinking moments. Realizations come to me just when I'm driving or when I'm in the shower, when I'm on a walk. I like to walk a lot. And everything is relative in terms of you're seeing your life through the lens of what is going on in your head and your belief system and what your experiences are. So for someone, something may be fantastic, and other people, they may have the lens of that of not being something positive for the manner. And it's all through the perception of what your beliefs are and how you're seeing something. So I think from that perspective, the relativity of someone, for you, let's say finishing that book, that is something that proves to you the type of person that you want to become, someone who starts something and finishes something. But for someone else, like finishing a book may be a distraction to them for something that they've been supposed to be working on. So I think everything's relative for that person, and having self-awareness in yourself, which is something that I constantly try to work on for me, is extremely paramount into whatever endeavor and any entrepreneurial, any venture, any business, even if you're an employee. Understanding yourself and how you react and how you think and the belief systems that you have is paramount for me, at least in my opinion, of becoming better, if that's something that you want to do.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense, Taylor. That's awesome. Love it. Whether or not it's you're being a completionist or whether or not it's something that's you're using as a distraction from something else, understanding why you're doing something is more important than the action itself, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's awesome. So Taylor, that opened up a whole can of worms just because I said the S word with stoicism there, but I absolutely love having conversations like that. So I appreciate you sharing your side on that. So
yeah.
With that being said, Taylor, I'd like to transition this into something that I call the final round. It's where I'm going to ask you the same 4 questions I ask everybody that comes on the show. It gives us a good idea of how you are under a little bit of pressure with some, I would say, semi-tough questions. Just it makes you really think about some of the challenges that you've had to face and deal with throughout your time, I guess really in adulthood for you there. So if you're ready to go, we'll get that party started.
Let's hit it.
All right, Taylor. So very first question of the final round is, what's the biggest mistake you've ever made when it comes to your finance or business life?
Biggest mistake I've ever made, finance or business life. I think from a finance perspective, I don't know. I look at mistakes differently. So I'm gonna dodge the question a little bit, and then I'll answer it as well, just to give everyone a complete answer. But I think everything that I've done, I've been able to learn from and improve to where I am today. And I'm happy with where I'm at today and the path that I'm on. So I wouldn't say any one financial decision was something that negatively impacted me enough to really derail me from my goal and the mission that I have in terms of where I want to go. So I think the money that I've spent on courses, coaching, interviews, meeting people, client events, things like that, some of them haven't had a ROI per se on a monetary value, but in terms of the knowledge that I've learned, each of those has given me something that I didn't have before, which is the knowledge of that situation. And so for me, I've spent $25,000 before on meeting with people, and I don't think I've necessarily seen a return from clients or money or anything like that. But the knowledge that I learned in that situation, for me, truly has made me a better broker, individual, human. And so I look at it from a lens of what have I been able to take away from each of those financial decisions. Now, to answer your question in terms of what I guess business-wise mistakes that I've made, being very much quick to act and maybe not thinking through second or third order thinking, which I'm actually just recently understanding what that means. I've studied a lot of, like Elon Musk does, I think second order thinking is the way that he Like, and then what happens next? So I made a lot of decisions in the beginning where I just wanted to act, and I didn't necessarily think about the consequences of what that action would do in terms of that person's reaction to it, or the human psychology, or what are the cascading events that's going to be happening from this decision, and maybe seeing an opportunity and going for it without figuring out, okay, is there a side door option to this, or how do I save this deal, or how do I set myself up before the deal gets to a point where it can blow up? Just from a specific example, like what can I do pre to not allow that to go bad? So I think just learning from those decisions, I've had a bunch of deals blow up where I probably could have saved them if I was proactive in the beginning.
Yes. And we'll get to that in a second too, but I feel with your mindset, you definitely have the right mindset when it comes to dealing with a mistake, or not so much a mistake, but you look at it as a learning experience. Everything that goes wrong is an opportunity to learn from. And you went to school at University of Alabama, you studied finance and real estate, got your degree, but you also continue to keep learning even after school, right? And now you pretty much have a PhD now in dealing with life itself, right? And dealing with the mistakes that you've made and learned from. The way that you look at things is definitely the right way to look at it. So speaking of that, this next question kind of ties into that. And that is, what is something that you've learned that you wish you knew when you first started out?
What is something that I wish I knew when I was first starting out? So understanding human psychology better. I would say understanding motivations has been a weaker point of my, like, it doesn't come natural to me to connect with people on more of I'm not like the people person. I'm pretty introverted by nature, and I'm not one to go and be the catalyst for creating stuff. And I think I've learned through just the opportunities that I've missed, or the opportunities that I've made, where when I was that catalyst, when I was the one going in proactively trying to create something and put myself in a position to be successful, it tended to favor it. I created my own luck. If that, for a sentence, and now I don't know if that's an analogy, but whatever, I created my own luck. And I think I've learned that I got to put myself in more situations and put myself out of my comfort zone, because it may sound weird, but my comfort zone is behind a phone, making cold calls and calling people and trying to dig up deals. And for a lot of people, that's not the case, but for me, it just is. So I think putting myself in a position to go and out networking events, go do other things besides that comfort of being on a phone and cold calling someone. I've learned that there's a ton of value in being face-to-face and meeting with people and doing stuff that maybe doesn't come as natural to you, but was instrumental in growing whatever business line. And for me, specifically my brokerage business, doing those things that I know I should do, but are just slightly uncomfortable.
Yeah, that's fantastic answer. And Taylor, not many people say that they like cold calling, so more power to you.
I'm a strange dude. I know I'm strange. Mike, I know I'm people, even people in the office, they're like, dude, what? I know that. And I embrace that. And I think for me,
it's effective.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
I was a Navy recruiter, and one of the things I hated doing the most was cold calling, but I actually set the most appointments that way. So I loved going out and just meeting people and doing it that way, but cold calling, that was the way to do it. So I'm very much an extrovert, maybe an introverted extrovert, because my energy gets zapped when I'm around people for too long, but I love being around people. So I guess that's the right way to put it. I don't shy away from, I love going to networking events. I love going out and being face to face with people. I host my own out here in Hawaii. I've got one coming up this week that I'm really excited about. So yeah, I think it's important to know who you are when, no matter what it is that you're going into, and the fact that you understand where your strengths and weaknesses are. Again, it's something that you can control now at this point. Once where you're at, you now gain control over that. And I think that's one of the important things for people to understand is gaining control over some things that you think you can't control when you really can control them. And again, this next question kind of ties into that. And Taylor, that is, do you have any tips or tricks that you would recommend to someone that is just getting started out today? Let's say somebody that's getting out into the real estate market, they want to get into multifamily, or from your perspective of somebody getting out as a broker, what would you say to them today?
I would say stay organized from the beginning. A lot of times, at least I see when guys are starting out in this business and then maybe some new operators, right? It's you don't have a ton of stuff to manage. So maybe the organization front is not a priority. Set yourself up. And I'm not naturally, I would say, as OCD about certain organization things. Start fresh and start organized and stay consistent with keeping that organization like perfect, because the missed opportunities, when I look back, it's mostly from like you forget to follow up with someone, or they slip through the cracks because of something where you just weren't organized enough to know that. And having a schedule and sticking to it in terms of that organization and making sure it's down packed. I think starting out from the gate, just set yourself up for success with planning on, okay, if I'm going to do this for the next 50 years, what does that have to look like? And knowing that, okay, if I'm going to be doing this for a long time, I better set up my systems in the beginning to be solid. So for me, I think setting up your systems and the way that you stay organized with people and communication and all of that stuff, documents, whatever it is, be organized.
Yeah, absolutely love that. Absolutely. Started off right at the beginning. I have experienced that pain myself with certain things, not like deciding to organize after it started becoming too much.
Yeah.
And it definitely makes the process a lot more painful, Taylor. So I really appreciate that answer.
Trust me, I know.
The final question of the final round is, and this is a opinion-based question, but do you have a favorite business, investing, or real estate related book or podcast, or both?
Yes. So I think there's a lot of correlations between CEOs and founders, entrepreneurs to real estate. So I listen to a lot of stuff like that. One book that I'm reading right now that I just really love is it's The Diary of a CEO, like 33 Laws to Success or something like that, by Stephen Bartlett. He was UK. He has a podcast called The Diary of a CEO. And there's so many things in that book that he uses actual science to prove some of his points that I think if someone can embody and really understand the lessons in that book and implement that and find ways to implement it in their business, so many things. Like, for example, he talks about sweating the small things. And for what that means to me is like, if you forget to brush your teeth for the day, like probably nothing would happen. If you were to forget to brush your teeth for a month, your breath would probably stink and it would just be a little bit uncomfortable. But if you forgot to brush your teeth for 5 years, your teeth would be falling out. And so the consistency in the moment of the small things of doing it every day, of brushing your teeth every day, like that compounds to a level that is, humans have a hard time envisioning what the eighth wonder of the world, as Warren Buffett says, of compounding actually looks like. So doing the small things every day, what he talks about in that book, I think was something that stuck out to me, where I was like, yeah, there's certain things that I'm inconsistent with, and there's other things that I'm very consistent with. So figuring out where those holes are for me and how I can basically make the discipline equation become less. So it's easier for me to actually do those things. That for me was something that was stuck out to me and just something that I'm reading now. So really like that book. That's a good one. Podcast wise, Diary of a CEO, Founders Podcast by David Senra isn't necessarily real estate focused, but like some of the lessons from some of these really high performers is just incredible. And I love his storytelling abilities. That's a great podcast. There's our CEO, Kyle Matthews, has a podcast where he interviews a lot of real estate guys. And one thing about my CEO, and I'm just so fortunate to fall into this. He's an incredible leader and an incredible storyteller and just someone who can move a room. And for me, I've never been someone to be able to have that just room presence, but I think it's something that you can learn and grow. And so being around him and listening to him speak has been very instrumental in my growth of just communication. So he's a podcast. I think it's called the Matthews Mentality Podcast, and it's real estate focused and specifically as well. So that's a couple that I've been listening to that I think your listeners might like.
Right on. You cheated there and gave a bunch of stuff. That's okay.
Yeah.
One of them was great though, is the Diary of a CEO, because that's a book and a podcast. So that makes it easy for people to go check it out and find it. Okay. That is it, Taylor, for the final round. However, I do have another question I want to ask you. And this is the most important question I'm going to ask you throughout this entire interview. because whether or not it was the real estate side that we talked about, the multifamily real estate side, or whether or not it was that little spout of stoicism that we talked about, my listeners are like, hey, I want to learn more about Taylor and what he's doing, or maybe even if they're out in LA and they want to buy multifamily real estate, or they just need another broker to build a relationship with. I'd like to be able to share with them where people could find that information about you. Do you have a website, any social media profiles, anything like that you could share with us today?
Yeah, I'm mainly on LinkedIn and Twitter. You just search my name, Taylor Avakian, I should come up there. And I don't know if this is the most important question, but I do appreciate you saying that. But yeah, LinkedIn and Twitter is a great place. I'm currently trying to build a website right now. It's in R&D. So hopefully that'll be out shortly soon. Working on the social media stuff and trying to get the brand out there. But from the content that I post the most, Twitter and LinkedIn are the places you can find me. And if you just search my name, like my website, my phone number, email, all that stuff is available for you. If you ever need to reach out to me, just search my name and it'll come up.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Taylor. We're going to have your social media links and stuff put in the show notes to make it easier for our listeners to find you. But to my listeners, the drill, if you're driving right now, don't click the link or don't copy and paste it right now. Wait till you're in a safe place. You guys know the drill. But hey, Taylor, this has been absolutely fantastic. I really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me today and come on the show. I enjoy doing this so much. I love interviewing people, but especially when I connect with somebody on a separate level, like the way that we connected today, just talking about stoicism. I really appreciate that. And I really appreciate just the fact that it is a Saturday, and I know you're a busy guy. You came into the office to have this conversation with me, sweating over there, although I can't tell over the camera here, but I know the AC's out. Again, there is a sacrifice for everybody that comes on the show. I do want to point that out and just say thank you so much for joining me today.
Mike, I'm very grateful for you having me on today, and I hope the listeners got a few nuggets that they can take away from this. And keep doing you, man. This is this podcast stuff is not easy. Continue to do this. You doing this for your listeners is extremely valuable, Mike, and I know it will not go unforeseen and ungiven. So thank you, man. Thank you for doing what you do.
I appreciate that. I really do. And I also want to thank all of my listeners out there. Thank you all so much for joining me and our special guest today, Taylor Avakian, on the Average Joe Finances podcast. Please go leave us a 5-star review and tell us what you liked about today's episode with Taylor here. Aloha from Hawaii and from LA, and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you for making it to the end of this episode. Greatly appreciate you being here with me today on the Average Joe Finances podcast. If you haven't done so yet, make this the episode that you go leave us a 5-star rating or subscribe to our YouTube channel. The Average Joe Finances podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only. Have an outstanding day.
Thanks for listening to the Average Joe Finances podcast, your source for beating debt, saving money, and investing. Learn more at averagejoefinances.com.